Welcome to Good Grief, the podcast where resilience meets reality. I'm your host, Dr. Christine Malone. In this podcast, we delve deep into the stories of individuals who've triumphed over tragedy, adversity, and trauma. In every episode, we bring you raw and honest narratives from guests who faced life's most challenging moments head on. Through candid conversations, they share their journeys of resilience, shedding light on the strategies, mindset shifts, and support systems that empowered them to rise above their darkest hours. Join us as we explore the profound depths of human resilience and discover how, even in the face of life's toughest trials, there can be light, growth, and yes, good grief. Okay, listeners, thank you so much for joining me for this episode. Today, we are honored to have Dr. Paul Zeitz with us. Dr. Zeitz is a preventive medicine physician, epidemiologist, movement builder, and an ordained Shir Hashirim rabbi. He spent decades working on causes that touch many facets of human well-being, from fighting the AIDS epidemic to climate change, racial and gender equity, and international child welfare. In his new book, Revolutionary Optimism, 7 Steps for Living as a Love-Centered Activist, Dr. Zeitz offers actionable strategies to help people channel their passion into impactful work. We'll dive into his personal journey, how he learned to fail forward, and the tools he offers for becoming a love-centered activist. Dr. Paul, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Christine. I'm honored to be here with you.
Yes, I appreciate you. So tell us a bit about, and I know kind of your journey sort of started when you moved your family to Africa to fight the AIDS epidemic. So tell us a bit about that. Why'd you do it? When did you do it? What was your goal?
Yeah, so back in the 1990s, I pursued specialty training in public health and preventive medicine at Johns Hopkins University. I had worked in Latin America and India, and I really my heart got called to go to sub-Saharan Africa. At that point, I was working on child health and child survival, and I wanted to go to where the statistics were the worst, the highest rates of under 5 childhood mortality and malnutrition and so forth. So we ended up moving to Zambia, which is a country in southern Africa, the former Northern Rhodesia for some of your listeners. And I was there at a time when they had some of the worst statistics on the continent. And when I got there, we also did the first epidemiological studies, and we showed that the AIDS pandemic was raging in the society. And it was estimated at that time that 1 out of 4 adults, 15 to 44, were on the road to dying, and they didn't have any access to life-saving AIDS medicines. And so my family and I had to make a choice. We had 3 little kids, and I was traveling a lot, and we either had to shift my career to domestic focus, or the whole family had to move. So my wife is an adventurer, and so we went with 3 little kids over to sub-Saharan Africa in Zambia. And I was there working as a public health professional and working inside the government of Zambia and as a senior advisor, and then working inside of the U.S. government, trying to channel the monies to invest in things. And I had this day where I had a wake-up call. I was driving down a road right past the university teaching hospital, which the Zambians called the departure lounge, because it was just where people went to die. It was a hospital that was so underfunded and over-demanded upon. There were so many sick and dying patients in the hallways that people had to lie in the hallways, and there was no medicines, there was no IV fluids, very few rubber gloves. And I was driving past that, and I came across an intersection, and there was a small white minivan there, and there was a Christian Aid Youth Project, and guess what they were doing? They were selling coffins, and they were selling coffins, small coffins for young children and larger coffins for adults. And then I realized that I had been driving by it many, many times, but I never really saw it. And then I saw it that day, and I remembered that they're all over the capital of Zambia, which is called Lusaka, the city of Lusaka. And then I pulled over and I wept. I just sobbed that we had let the crisis of HIV and AIDS get to that point. That's the moment where I became an activist advocate. I didn't quite know what that meant, but I made a commitment to do whatever I could to end the global AIDS pandemic. So not that long after that, I left, came back to Washington. And as a physician who had been in the front lines, we built an advocacy movement with Democrats and Republicans, and we advocated on the Hill and with the incoming Bush administration back in 2000. And then a couple years later, President Bush announced the president's emergency plan for AIDS relief, which no one thought was possible, a multi-billion-dollar effort. And that led to massive investment by the US and other governments all over the world, especially in Africa. And now over 60 million lives have been saved from those programs 21 years later. So I feel like that's a guiding star for me, that experience of like thinking that you're facing an impossible challenge and that it's not possible to solve it. And you have to fight against that kind of mindset and something can happen. And so that's my guiding star for my journey now.
It's kind of been a theory on some of the other podcasts I've done with other guests, and I'm obviously in that boat as well, where people might think, one person can't do this or whatever, you can't affect change, it's too big of a problem or it's too big of a thing. And I have personally experienced many things where laws have been passed that I have been an advocate for and been an activist for, that it's just like, just don't get that negativity out of your brain and just go for it if it feels like that's something you want to do. So your book, so you've got 7 steps to help people identify their passions and align them with meaningful action. So can you kind of take us through what does that mean? Where does it come from?
So following all the work I did for AIDS for over a decade, I then was excited about the opportunities to do advocacy on the climate emergency and on combating childhood sexual violence. I'm a survivor of childhood sexual violence myself, so there was very little happening in response to it or for prevention. So I've worked on building movements for that. I'm now doing a lot of work on advocacy around democratic innovation and democratic reconstruction of our democracies. But I realized that I never had like a handbook. I had to write a handbook called Revolutionary Optimism, 7 Steps for Living as a Love-Centered Activist. And I realized that it's about my ability to generate myself with revolutionary optimism. That's a personal choice that I have to make to understand how my mind works and how my systems in my body work so that I can then overcome the default negative nature of all of our minds, the fear-based programming that our minds have. And so that I can, in the face of all circumstances, come up and generate myself with optimism. So the book has 7 steps. The arc of the book is really, the first 3 steps are really about our personal journey of self-actualization, self-liberation, really. And how do we, what are the tools that we need to optimize ourselves? And I can go into that in more detail. The 4th step is called peace crafting, and that's really about how we relate to each other. And then the last 3 steps are really about our collective liberation. How do we build love-centered movements? How do we spark peaceful revolutionary action to really make large transformational change, and then unifying as we go along the way? So it's the chemistry or the alchemy between our own internal liberation and then what we can help manifest in the world.
So it's not for someone who, I want to start my own event and I want to do this thing and I want to just solve, world crisis, whatever. It's more to get people to understand that how to get in touch with what it is they want to work on and so on. Not necessarily the guidebook to be the CEO of some, rescue organization.
Well, that's a possibility. I mean, but yes, you're right. It's for everyone, really. And it's for understanding about that. Actually, I start off the book with step 1, which is it's go time. And a big part of that book is to say we all, or I would imagine that the vast majority of your listeners are already love-centered activists, and that every love-centered action counts. So a love-centered action can occur. I have this thing about the 4 circles of service, and that includes self-love and self-care. Anything that take care of ourselves, like take a break or go get a massage or go take a hike or whatever we might do. Then how we care for our family and our loved that's love-centered action. That counts. And then as we go into the community, anything like we do for that, and then the broader society or the global view. So I would say all your listeners are doing aspects of love-centered action right now. So everyone already is that. They may not identify as that, but that's okay. So I want to take a breath, you're already there. You don't have to aspire to be something you're not. You're already there. And then I go on to explain practices and experiences and stories from people around the world who are regular people like you and I are, who have done extraordinary things.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'm curious. So, do you find ever people that are not real sure what value or interest I really want to align with on this? I mean, is there? So I've got so many things like climate change, a big one for me. Definitely anything to do with children, so on and so forth. I mean, narrowing it down to say, okay, here's something that you could work on because it's
Yeah, absolutely. And we are not single issue people. Audre Lorde said that. We are all these issues, right? And so in step 5, it's called Imagineering, and it's about unlocking our political imagination, our radical visions. And then we're not in this alone. We're in this together. So it's about building love-centered movements. And I have a lot of tools and practices in that step about like, okay, what do I want to focus on? There's a lot of ways that I can serve. I can serve as a leader or a catalyst, or I can just be a supporter. And then there are times where I just want to be a monitor and I don't have to do everything. And it is about, and then I have a whole set of prioritization criteria, like where is my time going to have the biggest impact, or and I also offer this notion that we can experiment. We can do it one way for 6 months and then shapeshift and try something else. And then through that kind of experimentation, we can find what our soul's purpose is, or what we're really called to do. And that's not static. That's something that changes over time.
yeah.
Sometimes people think they have to have it all figured out. And I'm like, no, the fun of life is to keep exploring and keep imagining. And then, maybe you'll want to dig into deeper, and then you can pursue that as well.
Right. Well, of course, yeah, things do change, obviously. I mean, even your conversation about, the AIDS epidemic, I mean, it has changed there. There are medications in different places now where people can get what they need, maybe not a sense of complete equity, but it's a different conversation in and of itself. So,
Mm.
in your experience, how have you personally used optimism or whatever you want to phrase that to kind of get past challenges and so on?
Well, yeah. So revolutionary optimism. So, the example in the AIDS work that I did was where I realized like what was going on with me. Like I would be in the wards with the dying patients, or I would be in the malnutrition wards where young infants were literally dying in their mother's hands, right in front of me. And then I was like, I found myself going, okay, this is the situation right now, but I can see a plan to totally transform, and then take whatever action I can to try to manifest it. And so that was me. That was inside of me, my ability, possibilities in the face of despair and in the face of suffering. And so, yeah, then I worked on the climate issue, for example, and we have a very serious climate emergency underway. And even now, sometimes I get despairing about the lack of progress, and I'm worried about the impact of the climate crisis for future generations. And then I have to say, oh, wow, look, there's all these movements that are underway, and all these people that are fighting for transformation. And I went as far as implementing civil disobedience. Earlier this year, I was joined an organization called Climate Defiance, and we were bold and brave, and we jumped onto the congressional baseball game and interrupted the game. And
Wow.
and 8 of us were arrested, and we were then held overnight, and we were detained and really mistreated, I would say. And through that process, and then we ended up all pleading guilty because under the laws of the system, yes, we weren't supposed to jump onto the field, but we were trying to raise the point that these people shouldn't be playing a game with our lives, right? They shouldn't be allowing fossil fuel production and expansion so that our atmosphere is polluted with carbon and it's making our planet not sustainable for future generations. So, you know,
Yep.
it was like when I was in the cell block and, not sleeping and not eating. And, I was like, what am I doing? And then I had to go, I'm here because for a purpose and to
Yeah.
make a statement. And, I have to generate myself that way.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful. That's gone above and beyond anything I've done. I've never been arrested for a cause. I've been I've physical violence over a cause, specifically to do with women's rights, being
Mm.
assaulted by people outside of a trans, whatever. Anyway, that sort of thing, but not arrested. They should have been arrested. The
The perpetrators there. Yeah.
people who were coming after us just for trying to help these young women across the line. But nevertheless, one organization that you or movement that I know you're involved with that I'd like to hear more about is this U.S. National Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation Movement. So, what is that all about?
Yeah. So, in 2000, in the wake of George Floyd's murder, and then there was this massive mobilization, actually the largest mobilization for racial equity and racial justice in U.S. history. And it actually mobilized people around the world. Right after that, Congresswoman Barbara Lee introduced legislation for the first time ever, calling for a U.S. truth, healing, and transformation that would examine and study the role of the federal government in perpetrating laws and policies that were contributing to racial equity. And so we built a large movement of hundreds of organizations that were keen on doing that. It was really modeled after the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was a very successful example of how a society that had been fractured by the apartheid system. And when Nelson Mandela was released from jail and then became president of South Africa, one of the first things he did was set up this Truth Commission where healing could occur, where the perpetrators could share what they did and the impact of the survivors was shared publicly. And then there's this one story which I share in my book, Revolutionary Optimism, where this mother forgave the prison guard who had killed her and ran up and hugged him, and he passed out. He couldn't believe that he could have been forgiven. And this was like live on TV. And so the kind of rippling that could occur with this kind of thing. And so we imagined that that would be a possibility for our own country to heal the racial wounds that are still very much alive in our society. So we worked on that for a couple congressional cycles. Unfortunately, we never got it passed into law. And Congresswoman Lee is now leaving Congress in January of 2025. So we'll have to determine the best way forward for that idea.
New champion, if you can. Yes.
What's
No.
that?
I'm a new champion for it, and
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There are many other champions that we'll be able to find. So
for sure, that's really an important issue. So I know it was a 2020, just last year, then that you became ordained as a Shir Hashirim rabbi. So has that role impacted what you do as an activist? Has it? I mean, was it just because you personally just wanted to do this, or how did that come about?
Well, I have a deep spiritual practice in my life, and as I've been working and traveling around the world and facing the suffering and being at the front lines, if you will, I then dug into my own journey, my own spiritual journey, and trying to reconcile my vision for loving a love-centered, justice-centered world and the dissonance between what I see actually happening, and that created a struggle inside of me. So I went into interspiritual learning. I studied Christianity and Buddhism and Hinduism and did a lot of different practices. And I was born a Jew, so I also went into that path as well. And I found a teacher named Rabbi Shefa Gold, and I studied with her for 30 years actually, but she offered a deep dive program into a sacred text called Shir HaShirim, as you said, which is actually the Song of Songs, the Song of Solomon. And it's a short text, actually. It's only 8 short chapters. And it's about a relationship, a love relationship between a man and a woman and their journey. But it's actually a metaphor for our own relationship with what I call the great mystery, or that unknown, the great some people call it God, or some people use the word Jesus, or whatever language people use. I say the great mystery. It's this unknowable power that's out there. And so, yeah, I feel really honored to have been ordained as that, and it's like a challenge for me. Actually, it's a stretch to figure out like how can I live into that. And so, my book actually, Revolutionary Optimism, was my first offering of being a teacher of love, and it's really about how do we live the path of love, how do we walk the path of love, and how do we bring that into our everyday life.
Right. Oh, that's fascinating. So what's next for you? I mean, you've just got this book come out. What's the next activism or book, or what are you working on?
I knew that 2024 was going to be an epic year in our country, in our world. I didn't know exactly how it was going to turn out, but as I wrote the book and published it, I'm hoping that for anyone that is despairing right now or hopeless, this is a perfect tool. I do highly recommend that people do it in groups, because there's a lot of work that can be accelerated and supported when you're doing it with others. So I have a journal and handbook that goes along with the book, if that's of interest. And then I have been focusing on our democracy and like understanding how it's working and not working. And my colleagues and I are mounting a campaign, which we're going to be launching in January of 2025, focusing on citizens' assemblies. And there's some experience about that on the West Coast in Oregon and Washington State, where citizens are mobilized through lottery or random selection, and then they're given policy making and policy deliberation skills and responsibilities. And that is the idea, is basically the government. So we have an executive, a legislature, a judiciary, and we believe that a fourth branch is needed, a citizens' assembly, where given across the political spectrum, randomly selected, like jury duty. So you're getting people from all ideas, but when you're brought together for learning and then deliberating, you're probably more able to come up with common sense win-win solutions than our politicians, which are, designed to be at loggerheads.
Yeah, no, it's perfect example. I'm thinking from my business background about, if you have a group of people trying to solve a problem, you want some diversity in that group. You don't just want all white men or all whatever you want. You want a lot of stuff going on, different beliefs, different backgrounds, different ages, different everything. Otherwise, you aren't going to get that well-rounded thing. You'll get that kind of more homogenous thinking where we're all in the same place because we all have the same group of experiences.
Right. And I think that's what's happening in our political parties, where you get these like elites that are driving it. And then the policies, then the political system and the election process becomes a battle. And then everyone is dissatisfied because we're sick of it. And we want common sense solutions for the challenges that we're facing on a day to day basis. And so this idea of citizens' assembly has been used all over the world to kind of intervene and actually go back to what democracy was intended to be, which is giving the responsibility for deliberation and policymaking and decision making to the people. And that is what's missing now from our system.
Yeah, no, completely. I preaching to the choir here. I completely understand what you're saying there. So, as I mentioned before, we're going to put a link to your book in the podcast notes so people can find that. And is there anything else though you'd like to share with our audience before we end today?
Well, I want to just invite people to seize the moment. And this is really a time where we need to rise up and we need to mobilize ourselves to create the world that we'd like to see. And I think it's important for people to do it with others. So find friends or family members or community members, church members that you want to partner with and go on this inquiry about how can we serve by changing our systems.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great. Well, Dr. Zeitz, thank you so much for being my guest today. It has been an absolute pleasure to chat with you.
Thank you so much. Have a great week.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Good Grief. We hope that the stories shared today have inspired and empowered you on your own journey of resilience. If you want to dive deeper into the themes of trauma, tragedy, and survival, be sure to check out my memoir, The Day I Became the Spider Killer, a memoir of trauma, tragedy, and survival. In this book, I shared my own raw and honest experiences, offering insights and strategies for overcoming life's toughest challenges. You can purchase the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or listen to it on Audible. Your support helps us continue to bring these powerful stories to light and spread a message of hope and resilience. Stay tuned for more incredible stories on our next episode. Until then, remember, even in the face of life's toughest trials, there can be light, growth, and good grief.